She said, "You're watching me again." I said, "Then why haven't you walked away?" It started as nothing. Just a glance held a second too long. A comment that cut sharper than it should have. Two strangers in the same tired place, circling each other like we both knew something the other wasn't ready to say. But what neither of us understood back then was that we were both waiting for exactly the same thing. We just didn't have the language for it yet. I was 34 years old and completely exhausted. Not the dramatic kind of exhausted you see in movies. No breakdown, no big crisis. Just the slow, quiet kind that builds over time. The kind that happens when you keep moving through life without stopping long enough to ask yourself why. A few weeks earlier, I had walked away from a job I spent 6 years building my life around. Nobody fired me. There was no scandal. I just woke up one morning and couldn't make myself go back. So I didn't. After that, my days started blending together. Errands that didn't matter, places I had no real reason to be, long drives with nowhere specific to go. That's how I ended up in a laundromat late one Tuesday night in November, watching strangers' clothes spin in circles, while I tried to figure out what came next in my own life. She was already there when I walked in, sitting alone in the far corner, her coat still on, even though the dryers made the room too warm. A paper cup of coffee sat between her hands, cold, untouched. She wasn't reading, wasn't scrolling through her phone, wasn't doing anything at all. Just sitting there in that strange way people do when they're not really waiting for laundry. I noticed her immediately, and apparently, she noticed me noticing. The third time I looked over, she was already staring back at me, not smiling, not curious, just direct eye contact, the kind that makes you instantly feel caught. I looked away first. A few quiet minutes passed, then I looked up again. She was still watching me. Before I could stop myself, I said, "You know, it's a little uncomfortable being stared at like that." She didn't react, didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly and said, "You've looked over here 4 times in the last 10 minutes. I felt heat rush into my face. I was just looking around." "Sure," she said flatly. Then she looked back down at her coffee, and for some reason, that irritated me more than it should have. I sat there replaying the conversation in my head, convincing myself she was rude, difficult, one of those people who create conflict out of nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't really it. Because there was something underneath her voice. Not anger, not cruelty, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion people carry after being misunderstood too many times. I didn't talk to her again that night, but I thought about her the entire drive home, more than I should have. The next Tuesday, she was there again. Same corner, same coat, same cold coffee. For a second, I considered sitting somewhere else out of pure stubbornness. Instead, I sat 2 rows away and pretended to look at my phone. For 20 minutes, neither of us said a word. Then one of her dryers stopped. She stood up to move her clothes, and as she lifted her laundry bag, it slipped from the bench. Everything inside spilled across the floor. She crouched down quietly and started gathering her things. I watched for a moment. Then I stood up and helped her. No dramatic moment. No speech. I just picked up the things closest to me and handed them over. When she looked up at me this time, something in her expression changed. Very slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. And the way she said those 2 words made me realize it had probably been a long time since someone had done something kind for her without expecting anything back. I sat down again. A few minutes later, without even looking at me, she said, "I'm not a difficult person." She paused. "I'm just tired of pretending I'm fine when I'm not." I didn't know what to say to that, so instead, I told her the truth. I know what that feels like. That was the moment everything shifted, because she looked at me then, really looked at me, and quietly said, "Yeah, I think you do." Her name was Diane. And she told me her story carefully, like someone testing whether another person could be trusted with fragile things. She had been coming to that laundromat for 3 months. Ever since she moved out of the house she shared with her husband for 11 years. Not because the machines in her apartment were broken, but because doing ordinary things alone in complete silence was harder than she expected. I understood that immediately. I told her about my job, about the morning I couldn't go back, about how strange life feels when your routine disappears, when your title disappears, when nobody needs you anywhere anymore. She laughed softly at that, not in a cruel way, more like someone recognizing themselves in another person. "We're both just sitting in a laundromat killing time," she said, "pretending we still have somewhere to be." We talked for almost 2 hours that night, about grief, about loneliness, about how nobody warns you that starting over in your 30s doesn't feel exciting. It feels terrifying, like standing alone inside a giant empty room. We talked about how it's possible to be surrounded by people who love you and still feel completely invisible somehow. At one point, her laundry finished drying. Neither of us moved to get it. Neither of us cared. Then one Tuesday, she didn't show up. I waited longer than I should have, told myself it didn't matter. But it did. I came back the following week. Still nothing. Then another week passed. Nothing again. By the 4th Tuesday, I had almost convinced myself I would never see her again. Then finally, she walked through the door, but she looked different, thinner, more tired, like life had taken another piece out of her while she was gone. She told me she had been sick, nothing serious, just the kind of sickness that feels heavier when you're already emotionally drained. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just handed her a coffee I bought from across the street and said, "You're sitting in my spot." And for the first time since meeting her, she smiled. Not the polite kind, a real smile. And something inside my chest loosened quietly. Something I didn't even realize I had been carrying. We still talk now, not every day, not always in person, but honestly, consistently, without pretending. She's building a new life now. So am I. And sometimes I still think about that first night. How close I came to never speaking to her at all. How easy it would have been to dismiss her as cold, closed off, too complicated. Most people probably would have. But here's what I learned. The people who seem hardest to reach are usually the people who've been reaching for someone the longest. The guarded ones aren't always unfriendly. Sometimes they're just careful. There's a difference. And sometimes, all it takes to remind someone they aren't invisible is one small moment. Picking something up off the floor, handing them a coffee, saying, "I know what that feels like." So if there's someone in your life you've already decided is too cold, too distant, too difficult, maybe look again. Not with pity, with curiosity. Because the most important connections in your life usually won't begin smoothly. They'll begin with awkwardness, with tension, with misunderstandings, with a look held a second too long. And if you're paying attention, you'll know better than to walk away.